North Korea says it's willing to prove its peaceful intentions, and so it invited international journalists to its main nuclear testing site on Thursday for this display.
3, 2, 1.
Well, the North claims to have destroyed at least 3 tunnels, observation buildings and living quarters at the test site. No weapons inspectors or nuclear experts were there, but CNN's Will Ripley was, and we'll have his report ahead this hour. In the meantime, joining me now from San Francisco, we have Philip Yoon, the Executive Director and COO of the Ploughshares Fund, and Markos Kounalakis is a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. Here in Los Angeles, former City Councilwoman Wendy Greuel, also conservative commentator and radio host Joe Messina. So Markos, we haven't seen you for a while, so we go first to you. Both sides say they're still willing to meet up, but it's up to the other one to make it happen. The reality is the chances of a summit anytime soon are remote to none, which means that this White House is now effectively dealing with not one nuclear crisis, but 2.
Yes, that's right, John. It's good to see you again. Will it happen now? Well, earlier this week we thought there was a 99.9% chance. Now there seems to be no chance that it'll happen by June 12th. But I think that this is just one more stage of the negotiation. I mean, Donald Trump wrote the book, and even though it's not available on Amazon in Pyongyang, I'm sure that the Kim family and his colleagues and his advisors read this book and recognized that they have a fair amount of leverage with nuclear weapons in their territory. So the negotiation is now ongoing. It's the next step. The president stepping away from this summit is just another negotiating point. It is, of course, one of the most risky negotiations that's being held, but this is just another manifestation of how he is conducting the negotiation.
It does have the high drama of a reality TV show. This one lasted 10 weeks. We could call it, the summit. Here's part of an opinion piece from New York Magazine. Many foreign policy analysts endorse the idea of bilateral talks between the leaders of North Korea and the United States. The problem is this particular leader of the United States and his belief that seat-of-the-pants, temperamental spontaneity is the best approach to the problem of avoiding nuclear war. Joe, I guess you go into high-stakes nuclear negotiations with the president you have, not the one you would like, but maybe this was the right strategy, wrong president.
Why? I mean, this guy's made deals all over the world and in some pretty bad situations. Just because it's a nuclear deal, I mean, we all get all crazy about that, but the reality is the basic behind a deal, the basis behind a deal are the same. Why would you, when you look at the art of the deal, you always ask for more than what you want, and you already lay out what you're willing to give up. If you have to give up more than that, the deal is done. It's over, and it's time to come back. I don't know why we're having a problem with
Wendy, I would disagree with that because in the sense that, you can walk away from a real estate deal and no one dies, there's not a nuclear war at the end of it. I mean, and you're not dealing with people who are interested in money and making a profit. I mean, the North Koreans, security is their #1 issue.
Ideological,
there are a lot of subtle differences.
economics. I mean, it's all of those things, and it's also about the position of Kim Jong-un and how he, his presence in the world. This is a very serious issue where it is not just about, as you say, a real estate deal. It is about the future of this world and nuclear power. And you cannot say that the way they went about this was a diplomatic way to deal with it, because unfortunately they set expectations so far. That's not the art of the deal. You set your expectations lower and you go up from that. He set it to a point where most people said it was never going to be realistic, and I think that's part of the reason that they pulled out, because they're not ready to make that kind of deal.
And the White House says overall cancelling the summit means the status quo still holds. There are tough sanctions and they're applying maximum pressure to Pyongyang. Listen to the Secretary of State before Congress.
There has been an incredibly effective global campaign to create pressure on the North Korean regime so that we could resolve the issue of Chairman Kim's regime threatening the United States of America. That existed yesterday, it exists today, it's likely to exist tomorrow. And so our process remains the same.
Philip, to you, do you see Beijing holding the line here? There are some indications that maybe they're starting to ease up on the sanctions, and there's been a lot of talk that the maximum pressure strategy is over.
Well, I'm a little skeptical about that as well. I think the Chinese, it's sort of a new ball game right now. what we have is Donald Trump effectively, the North Koreans have been very good in certain ways in terms of maneuvering this, that if this was going to break down, it was going to be because of Donald Trump. And in essence, the way he has handled this, not consulting with the South Koreans, hitting them completely out of the blue on this, I think that he's clearly, he owns this thing. And so I think the Chinese, if they want to, have an excuse really to start easing on the sanctions, particularly with what was a very conciliatory statement in response to Donald Trump's rejection by the North Koreans. I want people to understand the context. That's pretty unusual what they've said, that they're open to any time, any place to have a meeting, and there was maybe perhaps a misunderstanding. That's the gist of that statement by Vice Foreign Minister Kim Kye-gwan.
Markos, to you, I'd like to get your thoughts on the impact this will have on U.S. allies. The Washington Post is reporting that Trump's move caught South Korea and other allies off guard, in part by design, aides said. The president feared the news would leak out if foreign counterparts were alerted, though some in the White House were concerned about insulting the allies. So what do you see will be the impact, both short-term, long-term?
Well, I think he has to recognize that allies are already a part of this negotiation, right? We talk about it being the United States and North Korea. That's what the summit would have been. But the negotiation is a multi-party negotiation. We already know that the Chinese are involved. We know that the South Koreans are engaged, that the Japanese are engaged. So those allies that you are asking about need to be engaged, and they need to be a part of this in some fashion. So when they feel cut out, that is not exactly the best way to engage them and to incorporate their interests, their national interests, their security concerns. You really have to reach out and make sure that we've got that negotiation going. And maybe that's part of what's going on behind the scenes. It's very difficult for us to know when we see so much public spectacle going on, what's going on privately, whether it's in the second track negotiation or whether it's the new Secretary of State holding negotiations and meeting with representatives of these other countries. So, but John, what you say is important. You have to keep your allies and your friends on your side and informed.
Well, let's go to Paula Hancock now. She's live in Seoul. Because, Paula, this decision to scrap the summit is likely to be felt most acutely where you are. President Moon Jae-in has staked his political future on brokering some kind of deal with the North.
Well, that's right, John. I mean, this has really got South Korean officials reeling. They had no heads up about this, which is quite a surprise. The US saying that they only told South Korea and Japan about it after the letter went public. So they effectively found out when we found out. Now, we know there was a National Security Council meeting at midnight overnight, that the president and the ministers involved were meeting to try and discuss what was going on. They issued a photo of the meeting as well, and there are some very stony-faced ministers and president there. So clearly this is something they weren't expecting. Mr. Moon has only just got back from Washington, D.C., where he was sitting next to the US President Donald Trump discussing the possible topics of discussion at the summit. And the assumption was, we heard from the National Security Advisor on the way over there, 99.9% chance of this summit going ahead. Clearly something that he will regret saying now. But this is fairly humiliating for the South Koreans, the fact that they were among the last to know about this. Now, we also have some exclusive footage I wanted to show you, John, of the Max Thunder drills. This is the US-South Korean Air Force drill, and these are the drills that North Korea had quoted just 10 days ago, saying that that is the reason that the relationship between North and South Korea turned sour. That's when the North Koreans cancelled those high-level talks and said that potentially this summit was not worth it when talking about the North Korean and US summit. So clearly they have been angered by these drills. Now, whether or not it was these drills that really did force Pyongyang to change its tune when it came to warming relations with the South Koreans, we simply don't know. But President Moon said he thought that once these drills were over, then things would get better. But of course, things have changed in the past 24 hours. John?
Yeah, Paul, that's right. And there had been these warming relations, and we had a situation where President Trump made this announcement just hours after the North Koreans had actually set off explosives at their nuclear testing site. They said they were shutting it down as a goodwill gesture. Will Ripley was one of a handful of international journalists who were there at the time. He actually conveyed the news that the summit was, had been scrapped to the North Korean officials who were with him at the time. Listen to this.
We were sitting around the table, and I got the phone call and read out the letter from President Trump, and I can tell you there was just a real sense of shock amongst the people that I was sitting with, the North Korean officials. They didn't give any official comment, but immediately they got up and left and are now on the phone kind of relaying the news up to the top. And imagine how they're feeling at this moment, given the fact that they just blew up their nuclear site today as a sign, they say, of their willingness to denuclearize.
So, Joe, just a few days ago, anybody at the White House would tell you that, the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, he was a changed man, he was open, he was honorable, he was committed, he was sincere about, disarming and getting rid of the nukes and that kind of stuff, and that this was a genuine goodwill gesture that should be, praised. Now they're saying, well, maybe the site was still not operational anyway, had collapsed, which isn't, we don't know for certain. You can't trust the guy. I mean, the tune has changed very, very quickly.
We've never been able to trust the North Koreans, and you know that. But from day one, when he jumped into this, I mean, think about everything we got before we even opened our mouths. He gave us back, as you put, our hostages, right? He stopped the music blasting over the border. There were a whole bunch of things that he started to do, and I think he was moving too fast. His attitude changed tremendously, as some of the others can tell you, when he went to China. And every time he's had a meeting in China now, his attitude has changed. I think the Chinese want a bigger role in this.
Wendy?
I think it's not as simple as that it's just the Chinese. I think this is about the fact that he led an effort, initially tweeting and telling people this was going to happen and doing it in a way that was unorthodox, was not a way in which you design some type of a negotiation and going forward. And as you mentioned, it's not only, one day they're screaming at each other and the next day calling them honorable. I think he set expectations way too high, getting the Nobel Peace Prize, what they were talking about. It really is. This is reality. Having negotiations and doing this is difficult and not easy.
Reality as opposed to reality TV.
Yes.
Philip, I'd like to get your take, because I think, you have the feeling that maybe this is just a bump in the road, a very big bump, I guess, if you like, but this could all be resolved. But if this is the end of the summit and it's pretty much gone, the chance of these two countries these two leaders meeting, where do you put the cause at?
Well, I think there's going to be another couple turns of the wheel here, meaning that I think this thing is going to be salvageable. I think there's an element of gamesmanship here. I think, Donald Trump in his book apparently said you never want to be in a position where you want the deal more than they do. And I think there was a perception perhaps that he wanted the deal more. So there's some possible gamesmanship here. I also think there's a misreading. I think that if you take them at their word that because the North Koreans didn't show up to a Singapore meeting and they had bad words, they don't know they're North Koreans. I was involved in negotiations with them the first time I was with them. I think it was the second day they didn't show up either. And then the next day they showed up 3 hours late. That's what happens. And you've got to put that into your calculus. But I also think that they may have gotten spooked where they realize, well, maybe they don't have as a solid clad deal as they think they do, which is causing them to step back a little bit, given all that's going on with Donald Trump, with Iran, what's going on with the Russia investigation. He cannot afford a big loss in this one. And this one is going to be a big loss if it goes the way it seems to be going. So I think there's a lot of incentive for this actually to happen. I don't know when it will be, but I got a feeling it will happen.
Okay, well, one of the reasons why the North Koreans were spooked recently, it's being blamed on the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, and his talk about a Libya-style deal for the North Koreans. That's what he said.
We have very much in mind the Libya model from 2003, 2004. There are obviously differences. The Libyan program was much smaller, but that was basically the agreement that we made.
So to Paula in Seoul, explain the significance here of the Libya deal and what it actually means to the North Koreans and why this is such a big deal.
Well, John, this is something that North Korea has quoted for years, saying that they do not want to be another Libya. They don't want to be another Iraq. Now, John Bolton talking about the Libya deal as in there would be denuclearization in return for easing of sanctions. But what North Korea hears when they hear the Libya deal is that Libya agreed to give up its nuclear weapons program in line with what Washington wanted. And then several years later was that Muammar Gaddafi, the leader, was killed by rebels backed by Washington. Washington. So we have heard time and time again from North Korean officials that the reason they need this nuclear program and this missile program is exactly what happened in Libya. They don't want to be another Libya, and they need the missile and nuclear program as an insurance policy. So there were a lot of raised eyebrows here in the region when John Bolton mentioned that. Then the US president mentioned it again, and then the US vice president mentioned it. So this does sound alarms across Pyongyang when they hear about the Libya deal. They consistently say they won't be Libya, they won't be Iraq. John?
And Wendy, to you, of all the people in the Trump administration, John Bolton would know the Libya deal is like a cross to a vampire. You know, and when Donald Trump tried to correct the record and clean up what his national security advisor had said, he got confused between the 2003-2004 disarmament deal and the 2011 overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, which didn't help matters.
No, and look, when you're dealing, and there are experts out there too that will say to you, there's no deal is the same. And to compare when you are negotiating like this to a previous deal is again not the way. You want to start with, we're going to deal with you on your level. We're going to deal with the issues that are important to you, economic, nuclear power, all of that, and be able to sit down and do that. We all hope that this peace process would go forward, that some kind of deal could be made, but they continue to stumble, trip over themselves, and the right and the left hand don't know what the other's doing. And I think you see this in this conversation.
Let's go back quickly to Markos, because I'm wondering if, Markos, if Bolton didn't sabotage this summit, and there's a lot of suggestions that maybe he did, at the very least, he got his way.
Yes, it seems that when you're playing good cop, bad cop, and Bolton is clearly the bad cop in this scenario, Bolton got his way in this round. But may I just say one thing, John, because when we keep talking about this Libya deal, I think if I were Kim Jong-un, I would be more concerned about the Ukraine model, which was at the end of the Soviet Union, Ukraine had nuclear weapons. They gave them up under an agreement to the former Soviet Union, to Russia. Suddenly they were without nuclear weapons and became, in essence, a vassal state to Russia. So I think if I were Kim Jong-un, I would worry as much about a Ukraine-style deal with China next door as I would about the Libya problem.
You know, if we don't have a summit, then we still have the commemorative coin at least. And the good news is it's dated just 2018. There's no day, no month, just the year. So, Philip, there's still the rest of the year for a summit to take place. What are the chances? What are you giving the odds?
I'd say there's a pretty good chance that something is going to happen. Look, I mean, let's say, you know, I think the summit has got to happen in some way, because in the end, it's going to rest with Donald Trump, and it's going to rest with Kim Jong-un. I used to have this line where Dennis Rodman was the only American to have met with Kim Jong-un. Now we got Mike Pompeo, but we still don't know what this guy wants. And so I think here's an opportunity to really say, are you willing to give these up? If so, what's the time frame? How much is it going to cost? And then we can ask ourselves, are we willing to pay that? And so all of this is knowable. And for us to fall back on old stereotypes and the past in certain ways when we have a new leader in place, I think is folly, especially when the stakes are as high as they are, which is a possible war on the Korean Peninsula. This is knowable, so we got to find out what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good note to finish on. The stakes are incredibly high, Philip, so thank you. So, Philip, Markos, and we have Joe and Wendy and also Paula there, all the way over there in Seoul, South Korea. So thanks to you all. It was a very good discussion.